We're passing around a handout now that we'll take a look at in just a moment, because I'd like to create a little bit of a comparison contrast with something that we're going to learn about in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi today. Now, as you know, we've always been creating a dichotomy, a study in contrast between Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam and Maimonides. We've expressed before that it would appear from a number of places in the Rambam that there's no such thing as divinity inhering in people, places, and things. When we say that something is holy, a Maimonidean view of holiness is that God designates physical objects or people or places with special status, special responsibilities, special duties. But there's nothing intrinsic, like if we had a special meter, like a Geiger counter to gauge Kedusha. If we had a Kedusha Geiger counter and we held it over a Sefer Torah, it's not clear whether for the Rambam there would be like a big clicking of the Geiger counter over anything else. It's what makes it special is the fact that Hashem says, my name rests upon it, and so there is a special status to it from a halachic standpoint, from the way that you serve God with it, and therefore it has to remain special, and you have to respect it and treat it with sanctity. But can we say that for the Rambam there's a special Kedusha that inheres, such that if you had a Geiger counter you could be able to hear the clicking of the Geiger counter? It's not so clear from the Rambam that that's a reality, that there's such a reality called inherent divinity that infuses within the physical world. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi clearly says that that's the case. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has a Geiger counter, a Kedusha Geiger counter, and when he places it over the land of Israel and over other artifacts of mitzvah, and certainly over the Jewish people, the Geiger counter goes wild. And therefore he sees within the very essence of certain people, places, and things that were within the physical world, he feels that there's something inherent that within these physical things that are infused with a special type of divinity. And that's why we explained that at the very beginning of our second essay, which is really devoted more to the land of Israel than any other part of the Kuzari, we see that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi feels a responsibility to launch into the very delicate discussion of explaining how divinity or godliness inheres within the physical world, while at the same time being very careful to clarify that God himself can have nothing to do with the physical world. So it's a very delicate dance or balance, if you will, that on the one hand Hashem infuses his essence within the physical world, but he is not part of the physical world in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so that's what we had started with, and now he's just gotten through saying on page 154 that Eretz Yisrael is the holiest of all places, and therefore there are certain things on a spiritual plane that can only be accomplished in the land of Israel. And at the very end of that page, he gives an analogy to soil. He says, you see that even in the physical world, certain types of soil are more prone to producing robust crops than other places. Certain parts of the world, based on their soil, their topography, climate, are more prone to being more fruitful and to raising better cattle, livestock, and produce. And therefore it should not be surprising to you that we have the same concept on a spiritual plane, that there's a certain place in the world which is more prone to producing and to cultivating spiritual growth more so than any place in the world. Now, we all believe this on a certain level, because after all, most of us send our children to study in Eretz Yisrael. And we know that we're sending them, I think most of us hope, at least on this level, that we're not just sending them so that they can get away from home and have a fun year. We want them to be able to be as productive as possible, and we believe that there's a certain productivity that our children and we as well can have on a spiritual plane when we're in the land of Israel. Chazal tell us, Avira de Eretz Yisrael machkim. They tell us that the very air of the land of Israel makes one wise. Now, there are a couple of ways to understand that. Well, how is it that the land of Eretz Yisrael makes one wise? So the Balei HaTosafot basically just explain on a very rational level. They say that it's because when you go to the land of Israel, especially when the temple is standing, and you see all of the spiritual activity that is going on all around you, you walk down the streets of Mea Sharim, or you go to a kibbutz and you see religious Zionists working the soil, or you go to a yeshiva and you see the Beis Medrash filled with B'nai Torah, or to a seminary. So you see the spiritual productivity all around you, and you cannot help but to be caught up in that culture of spiritual growth. From that point of view, it's not something that's inherent within the land of Israel that makes one wise, but rather the fact that there's so much of that activity going on all around you is what causes you to be swept up in that culture. But for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's more to it than just that the environment all around you is making you wise. But it is true, quite literally, that the air of Eretz Yisrael, the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the produce that you eat from the land of Eretz Yisrael itself, makes you wise and makes you more prone to spirituality. So this brings us to our challenge, which we're going to start on page 155. Yes?
Currently, like if you go to Israel, you're not allowed to go on the Har HaBayit, it still has Kedusha. So can you say that the Kedusha is because he built the Beis Hamikdash there and he sanctified it, or was the Kedusha there before and somehow...
Well, it's a good question, and it may involve a little bit more of a technical discussion than we're prepared to go into, because the sages tell us that originally the Kedusha that was on the Temple Mount was later removed with the destruction of the first temple. And it was therefore, there was no longer any inherent sanctity after the destruction, but with the construction of the second temple, the Kedusha remained for all of time.
So can you say that the Kedusha is because you had the Beis Hamikdash there, or is there really something so unique about the land of Israel, or because we lived there and we chose it and put the Beis
Well, it's a question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? The fact that God told us to put a temple there means that, from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's standpoint, means that God, when he placed his divine presence there, infused that area with the most divinity of anywhere else in the world. And even after the temple was destroyed, Hashem says, I'm not leaving this spot in anticipation of the third temple. That could be one way of looking at it. But I don't know. Like, for example, the Rambam clearly acknowledges this halacha, that one today cannot enter the Temple Mount, at least certain parts of the Temple Mount, without sanctification and so forth. But, on what grounds? So the Rambam, who takes a very rational approach to these things, maybe just because the halacha precludes you from doing so because of this concept called Kedusha, which for the Rambam does not mean an inhering of divinity in a place, but rather meaning that you have to treat it with sanctity because God designates it with a certain special quality, and we have to revere that, and we have to show our reverence by distancing ourselves from it. Yes?
So I understand the two different approaches, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is the same. We have to treat certain places, things, people with extra respect.
Right. From a purely utilitarian point of view, yes. From a philosophical point of view is what we're talking about. That there is a very, very stark difference between the two.
But like you just said to Malka, either Hashem decided those things are going to be holier, or he gave us the mitzvah to make something holy. So at the end, the thing is holy. It's
from a practical standpoint, as far as how we approach a mitzvah, the halacha doesn't change. The way that we act upon it doesn't change. But there may be ways of us attitudinal differences that would be different. That's really what we're studying about. We're studying about the underlying reason for the mitzvot. And when we study the reasons, when we study the philosophy, the theology behind the mitzvahs, then we see very, very significant differences.
But let's say your example with the Sefer Torah. Like, is it important for us to know if the Sefer Torah in and of itself is holy, or it's only holy because
it's been designated with that?
Right.
Yeah. Is it important for us to know? I don't know. I don't know how your mind works. Everyone's mind works a little bit differently. And I think that for most people, we like to think in a very concrete fashion. So we do idealize this, that we do embrace this idea of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, that something is infused inherently with Kedusha. That we imagine, like Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has told us somewhere else, that when we're in a synagogue, we feel that the Malachim are closer, we feel that the Hashem is closer to us and He's more attentive to us. We feel that there's a greater level of whatever Shechina, whatever that divine matter is in this world, is a little bit more close. Whether that's true in reality or not, that's how our minds work.
I don't really feel that way. Like,
okay. That's why I said I don't know how your mind works.
Well, let's say a lady in Shul last week took my seat, and I had to move much further back. And she was apologizing to me, and I said, it's okay, I feel just as close to Hashem in the 10th row as I do in the first row.
Okay.
So,
God bless you. I mean, I think that's a great attitude. I think that it may be one of the differences, but it may be a male-female thing, because I think men are much more concrete in their thinking. It also may be that everyone is, everyone's different in their thinking. There are some people who feel that the place where I'm sitting, or my position and my closeness, if I can see the Torah, if I can touch the Torah, it connects me more with Kedusha. Yes.
So if somebody cannot be, let's say, in a shul in daven and be closer to the Sefer Torah, but they have to be at home and they daven as well, does that preclude them from being close to the Shekhinah?
Certainly for women there's no difference, because there's no requirement for a minyan. The Gemara says that a man should always strive to daven with a minyan, because the Shekhinah can only come down to a group of 10 men. But for women, there's no such requirement that's made.
But what if that happens to a man as well, and he cannot go to shul and he cannot daven in with a minyan?
So he should daven.
Yeah.
Because Hashem will never close the door on people who cry out sincerely to Him. So Hashem will hear all prayers. But there's a greater efficacy to prayer when it's done with a minyan and when it's done in the BAYT HaKnesset. Okay, so paragraph number 11 on page 155, the Kuzari says, I have not heard that the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael have any advantage over anyone else in the world. The Khazar king is basically saying, I look at the people in the land of Israel today. Most of them are Gentiles. As you know, he's speaking in a time when the majority population of Eretz Yisrael is either Christian or Muslim. And you know that this is being written at a time shortly after the Great Crusades in the Holy Land, and there have been massacres, both Christians massacring Muslims and Muslims massacring Christians, and then everyone massacring Jews, and then it spreads to Europe afterwards as well, because of the issue of the Holy Land, the struggle for the Holy Land. So, if anything, what kind of advantage do the people in the land of Israel have over anyone else in the world? You've just explained to me that the soil of the land of Israel has inherent greatness and produces greater produce. It produces greater people. What's so great about the people of Eretz Yisrael today? I haven't heard anything, right? Look, you look at an Arab who lives in the land, who lives in Israel. He doesn't seem to be any different from an Arab who lives in Saudi Arabia. So what's the difference? So this is where the king has to continue his analogy and say that it's not just an issue of the soil. In paragraph number 12, page 155, the rabbi said, this is like your mountain. You say that it has exceptional vineyards. Nevertheless, if the grapevine were not planted on it, or if its soil were not cultivated properly, it would not produce grapes. So soil is one thing, but there are two additional ingredients that you need in addition to having a good quality soil. Number one, you need to cultivate the soil. You need to fertilize it. You need to make sure that it's watered and irrigated properly, to make sure that it is prone and it is primed to be able to produce fruit. And then, of course, what's the most important thing? You got to plant the seeds. If you don't put seeds in the ground, then nothing's going to grow. No matter how robust and healthy and filled with nutrients the soil is. Now, what seeds are we talking about? So the only type of seed that grows properly. Now, there are different kinds of soil. You know, there's a certain kind of soil that if you plant grape seeds in it, even though it's a good soil, it might be good for tomatoes, but it's not good for grapes. It might be good for growing trees, but it's not good for growing produce. It might be good for building bricks for your adobe house, but it's not good for cultivating produce. And so, therefore, you need to have the soil that fits best with the particular type of produce that you're trying to grow. The land's distinguished qualities are manifest first and foremost in the nation, which is the elite in heart, as I've already discussed. They are like the vines in the analogy. So therefore, the only people that will grow, that will manifest the greatness of the soil of Eretz Yisrael are the Jewish people themselves. Because we are this elite species of humanity, only when we are planted in Eretz Yisrael does the greatness of Eretz Yisrael become manifest. If you plant an inferior type of seed, then no matter how superior the soil is, you'll only get back what you plant. So if the quality of the seed is from a bad pedigree of seeds, then it's not gonna help. So you have to plant the most excellent species in the most excellent soil in order to get the desired result. And here, of course, we again hear Rabbi Yehuda Halevi echoing that which he emphasized in the first essay, which is that there's an inherent, right, and that's the word we keep coming back to, there's an inherent specialness within the Jewish people. Not just because Hashem gave us the Torah, but because there's a certain spiritual genetic quality within the Jewish people that makes the essence of the Jew different from all other human beings. And for those who were not with us in the previous discussions when we went through the first part of the first essay, it's really worth your while to sort of go back to that discussion and really see for yourselves how eugenically based Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is invested into this discussion about the special nature of the Jewish people. Yes?
This special nature, this inherent quality, is it something that we receive after Har Sinai?
No, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, it's something that comes all the way from Adam HaRishon. And it was passed down only to a segment of Adam's descendants, to Seth, and then only to a portion of Seth's descendants, and so forth and so on until it comes to Avraham. Avraham then passes that genetic special quality over to only one of his sons, Yitzchak. Yitzchak in turn passes it over to only one of his sons, Yaakov. And then Yaakov successfully passes that on to all 12 of his sons. And so that's the way Rabbi Yehuda Halevi describes it. Different from the Ramchal's model in Derech Hashem, where the Ramchal talks about something that happened, something pivotal happening at Har Sinai, as you suggested, but not for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Now, then he continues and he said, the land is then aided by the deeds and laws of the Torah that relate to it, which are like the cultivation of the vineyard. So you can have Jews living in the land of Israel. So you've got great soil, you've got great seeds. Well, there's only one thing that you're missing. You're missing the cultivation. No one's watering the lawn, right? So even though you've planted great seeds, you've got a soil that's extremely rich in nutrients, but it's not being cultivated. No one's aerating the soil. No one's watering the soil. No one's fertilizing the soil. And what is the analogy to that, to the cultivation of the soil? It's the performance of mitzvot. It's serving Hashem. So you need three ingredients. You need the excellent seed, which is the Jewish people. You need excellent soil, which is Eretz Yisrael. And you need the cultivation of the soil, which is the service of Hashem. When you have those three ingredients put together, then you have amazing stuff happening in Eretz Yisrael, amazing people manifest in Eretz Yisrael, and tremendous spiritual energy being produced in the land of Israel, this tremendous spiritual fruit that grows in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, if you don't see it today, it's because you've got people who are not Jewish who are living in the land of Israel, and you don't have the level of cultivation You don't have, even if you do have Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have the type of service to Hashem that is necessary in order to generate that spiritual excellence, that spiritual superiority. Now, part of that spiritual service is not just putting on tefillin and lighting Shabbos candles, but it's also bringing the korbanos, bringing the sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash. So clearly, without that component, then we can accomplish a great deal in the land of Israel, but we're still limited even when we're in Israel and we don't have a temple. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi does not demarcate that clearly because, as we'll see, he himself made it his lifelong project to make Aliyah. Why? Because he felt that if I'm in Eretz Yisrael and I'm serving Hashem to the greatest of my ability, then I will be able to accomplish more as an individual. I, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, will be able to accomplish more in my life spiritually in Eretz Yisrael than in any other place that I've ever been. And so therefore I can justify taking great risks at the latter part of my life in order to be able to accomplish that which I have not yet been able to accomplish during this earlier part of my life, to be able to go to that final chapter in my life of being able to serve Hashem, even if it's only for a short period of time, in the land of Eretz Yisrael. Someone, yes?
With his concept of the specialness of the Jew, he doesn't contradict, though, the idea of everyone having a Tzelem Elohim.
No, it doesn't contradict that. Just because we're all special doesn't mean we all have to be on the same plane.
But this is just an add.
Yeah, there's some added feature. It says in Pirkei Avos in the 3rd chapter that Rabbi Akiva says, "Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem," that how beloved is man that he was created in God's image. And this, according to many commentaries, is a reference to all of mankind. But then he continues and he says that how beloved is Israel, who were given this beautiful gift of the Torah, so that there's this added feature that the Jewish people have, in addition to just having the Tzelem Elokim. Yes?
But I can't help thinking that I wouldn't want a non-Jew to read the Kuzari or to sit in on this class. And I'm thinking this is why they hate us, because we think we're better than everyone else. And maybe we are better than everyone else, but it's not good for them to know it, to think that we think we are. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And also to our Western ears who've grown up in school learning the Constitution, all men are created equal, and nobody's better than anyone else, we're all equal. It's
grating. It's grating on our Western sensibilities.
Exactly.
And you're absolutely right. And this is something that we've discussed in the past as far as the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's quote-unquote racist doctrine of chosenness. In this sense, the Rambam's understanding of chosenness is much more appealing to Western sensibilities because the Jewish people were not chosen because of any inherent quality of superiority that exists within the Jewish people, but rather because we were given a Torah. And it is that Torah which makes us special. It is, and when we rise to that calling of observing the Torah, because we entered into a special contract, a covenant, not that we're inherently different, but rather because we entered into a special contract with Hashem. So then we understand chosenness is not, there's no inherent superiority. But something tells me that the world is going to hate us if they choose to, whether or not they read the Kuzari or not. As I've mentioned before, the Kuzari doctrine is something that we should put away in our inventory, in our data banks, in our minds. To whatever extent we choose to emphasize it or exploit it is our own responsibility. I don't think that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's attitude towards the Gentile was, well, I'm more special than him or her, and therefore I can cheat them in business, and therefore I don't have to pay them respect. As we've just explained, every single human being is created in God's image. I think that for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's a special calling for every Jew because of the inherent quality that exists within the essence of every Jew, but it's never been meant to be used to exploit the other. As I mentioned in the introduction to the Kuzari, we also have to remember that for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the specialness that exists within every Jew, and that which makes the Jew so able to accomplish more than the non-Jew, is only manifest in the power of prophecy. And I've taken a lot of heat for what I've written in my introduction. I've gotten a lot of criticism from all over the world, people who have read that introduction, where I said, listen, at the end of the day, what makes the Jew more special than the non-Jew for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi? Nevuah. That for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, a Jew can achieve prophecy, which he says quite explicitly, and for the non-Jew, a non-Jew cannot achieve prophecy. That is the totality of specialness that exists within the Jew. Now, for those of you who are prophets, you should feel very proud of yourself. If you're a prophet, raise your hand. Okay. So the point is that my argument is that at least for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, this is pretty much a non sequitur for most people. Now, that's not to minimize the Kabbalistic school that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is a part of. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is writing this before the publication of the Zohar. He is writing this centuries before the publication of the Tanya, which does talk about, in much more concrete terms, the superiority inherently within the neshama of the Jew. For those later texts, you have even more problems of this very, very stark demarcation between the Jew and the non-Jew, and it does create potentially great problems. We see that those Jews who get sometimes too caught up with this attitude of we're special, we're different, we're better, treating attitudinally at least the non-Jew with contempt or with disregard or with disrespect. And that's a very, very important double-edged sword that we have to make sure that we don't get trapped in. That this is not about the unimportance of the non-Jew, but rather about the great importance and responsibility that the Jew has. And that if we don't fulfill our calling, then we have created a tremendous void within this very, very vast neshama that each and every one of us possesses. Yes?
I remember learning that the ability to become a Navi, or to become that prophecy, to be able to receive prophecy, was taken away from us. So we cannot reach that level.
The Gemara says that prophecy was taken away upon the destruction of the first temple, was largely taken away from the Jewish people. It's unclear whether Rabbi Yehuda Halevi subscribes to that Gemara, because it's an agadic passage of the Gemara. So how do we understand it and how do we apply it is very unclear. The Rambam also, it's not clear whether he subscribes to that statement of the Gemara or not, because the Rambam codifies a section of the Mishnah Torah in Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah. At the very beginning of the Mishnah Torah, talks about the laws of prophecy. Now, if the laws of prophecy are no longer extant, why would he need to codify it without even telling us that prophecy is unattainable today? So I don't know to what extent prophecy is attainable today. Certainly later commentaries like the Ramchal very clearly tell us that prophecy is impossible to attain today. But there are forms of pseudo-prophecy, things like we call Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration and things like that, where a person can be privy to divine messages, and to whatever extent that there may be differences between Jews and non-Jews in their ability to receive divine messages, is something also that's very, very vague and mysterious. Okay, now, so therefore, just to conclude this paragraph, ultimately this elite nation cannot achieve divinity anywhere else, just as the vineyard cannot successfully grow anywhere else except on the mountain. So what does he mean by divinity over here? And this goes back to what we were discussing. Divinity is synonymous with prophecy. And I'll prove that to you when we turn the page, which we'll do next time. But therefore, when he talks about the excellence that a Jew can attain in Eretz Yisrael, he is focusing primarily upon prophecy. Now, that's not to say that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi anticipated becoming a Navi upon reaching Eretz Yisrael. He clearly acknowledged that I may never achieve prophecy, but there's an advantage to going to Eretz Yisrael to be able to nurture whatever I can from the soil, the spiritual soil of Eretz Yisrael, to whatever degree I can, even if I will never attain that ultimate level of nevuah. So, while there's a special quality to the Jew, that special quality for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi can only be attained in Eretz Yisrael, and even then, it can only be attained in certain circumstances, and that specialness is manifest in the power of prophecy. Does that mean that a Jew should not strive to be in Eretz Yisrael because he knows that he won't be able to achieve prophecy? No. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's life is a testament, and as we'll see at the very end of the book of the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi personifies himself. He autobiographically portrays himself as the rabbi and says, I need to go to Eretz Yisrael where I can achieve my greatest potential spiritually. Okay, I want to just, in the couple of minutes that we have, just to be able to talk to you about the Ramban's approach to the special nature of Eretz Yisrael. We'll just take another 5 minutes discussing this because I want to be able to get to the Parsha. The Ramban in the book of Vayikra, in Perek Yud Ches Pasuk Chav Hei, he talks about this idea of the land of Eretz Yisrael spitting out the inhabitants when they do not behave in a certain fashion. And the Ramban, I believe, does not really subscribe to the Maimonidean model, but I don't think he subscribes to the Halevian model either, because he has a very metaphysical approach to the reason why Eretz Yisrael is holy. From Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's standpoint, there's an infusion within the very physical mass of the land of Israel that makes Eretz Yisrael so holy. But for the Ramban, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is ontological. It means it really does exist. It's not just based upon some kind of designation by God. But at the same time, it's not something that's infused within the physical mass of Eretz Yisrael, but rather is because of some kind of divine, celestial machination that's going on in heaven. That for some reason, the Torah says, Einei Hashem Elokecha ba, Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha ba, that God's eyes are constantly on the land of Israel, Mereshis Hashana Bi'arach Harishana, from the beginning of the year until the end. And the Ramban says that that's really what makes Eretz Yisrael holy. You see, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is not talking about any special divine supervision that takes place over the land of Israel, but the Ramban does. He says, why is it that the land of Israel is so demanding of its inhabitants to the point where the Torah testifies that the Canaanite nations are being kicked out of Eretz Yisrael, they're being evicted because they were bad tenants. Right? That's really what the Torah says. They were unruly tenants. They did all kinds of terrible behaviors that Hashem says I cannot sanction, and therefore they're being evicted, they're being kicked out. And you, Bnei Yisrael, have to make sure that when you go into the land of Israel and inherit it, and you become the new tenants of the land, that you don't get kicked out for your misbehavior as well. And here's where the Ramban launches into his explanation, and he says, and because of our brevity on time, he says, let's just jump to the third line in this commentary. At the very end of the line, he says, Veha inyan, ki Hashem hanichbad bara hakol, because really Hashem, as we know, created everything that exists. V'sam koach hatachtonim ba'elyonim. God places the dominion of everything that exists down here into the hands of celestial beings that are in the celestial plane. V'nosan al kol am va'am be'artzosam legoyehem kochavu mazal. Yadua ka'asher noda bi'itztagninut. That God places within every land and within every nation that is indigenous to that land a special celestial force, which he calls either a kochav or a mazal, right? A star, a celestial force that has a supervisory role to maintain that nation and that land. So the Chinese have a Chinese angel up in heaven, or Chinese celestial force, that watches over China, watches over the Chinese people, gives them that inventiveness to be able to make lots of things, manufacture lots of stuff, and then export it, right? And then you have the angel in India that has the special Indian force and Indian power and so forth. He says, and this is well known already to the astrologers of our time. V'zehu shenemar, and then he quotes the various pesukim. Now, if you skip to the next paragraph, he says, V'hinei Hashem hanichbad hu Elokei ha'elokim va'adonei ha'adonim l'chol ha'olam. He says, now God, of course, is the highest upper management. God's the CEO of this company, of this celestial company, where you have middle management, which are the angels watching over every single country and every single nation of those countries. And God is who we call Adonai HaAdonim. He is the master of masters. What do we mean when we say that God is the master of masters? We mean to say that he is the head, he's the CEO of all of the lower middle management angels that are under God's supervision. However, Aval Eretz Yisrael emtzaut hayishuv hi nachalas Hashem miyuchedes lishmo. He says, but the land of Israel, which is in the middle of the earth, the middle of civilized earth, he says, is God's special inheritance, which is designated only to the CEO. Lo nasan aleha min hamalachim katzin shoteru moshel, v'hanchilo osa le'amo. And therefore, God did not place any middle management angel to supervise the land of Eretz Yisrael. But instead, he says, I'm directly supervising what's going on in Eretz Yisrael because my nation is going to be there. La'amo hamiyached shemo zera ohavav, because these are the people, of course, that worship me, and they unify my name, and they are the descendants of my beloved patriarchs. And that's why the pasuk identifies the Jewish people as the segula, as the treasure, as the chosen nation. What are we chosen for? We are chosen in the sense, not that there's necessarily some inherent superiority to the Jew, but the way that God connects to us or supervises us, in however way we're going to understand that conceptually in our minds, is different from the way that he supervises every other nation in every other land. There's something called intermediary forces, and God allows other intermediary forces to supervise the rest of the world. But the Jewish people are supervised by Hashem directly. And that's what makes the Jewish people special, and that's what makes the land of Israel special. So, for the Ramban, the conclusions may be the same. There may be no difference halachically, but at least we're seeing a different model constructed of what makes the land of Israel special, what makes the Jewish people special. God says, I'm the CEO. It's like if you're working in a cubicle office, and your cubicle is right next to the boss's office, and he's got these big glass walls coming out of his office. So he sees everything that you're doing. You're not going to play solitary on your computer. That's probably like an old analogy by now. That's like so 20 years ago, right? But you're not going to play solitary on your computer when you're in your cubicle that's visible to the bosses, directly in view of the boss's office, right? If you're in a far-flung cubicle all the way down there and you've got some middle management guy that's watching over you and he comes by once in a while, all right, so you'll sneak in a few games of solitaire, right? So that's the difference for the Ramban. It creates a greater level of responsibility for the Jewish people, but at the same time, the rewards are far greater because why does Hashem do that? He chose us because he loves us, he wants us, he has high hopes for us. He put us right there in the front cubicle because he expects greater output, greater performance from us. And that's what makes us special. So it's not Halevian and it's not Maimonidean. It's somewhere in between. Am I making myself clear?
Is this talking about Eretz Yisrael or Bnei Yisrael?
Both. It's talking about both. He's combining the two. He says that the land and the people that live on the land are linked to each other. The Ramban is very, very dramatic in this claim because he says that really, in a sense, the only reason Hashem gave us the mitzvahs to perform outside of Eretz Yisrael is to keep us in practice. Really, the quality of the way we do mitzvahs outside of the land of Israel pales by comparison to the mitzvahs that we perform inside of Eretz Yisrael. So he's very, very much linking the nation to the land.